Today, in this episode, I am so massively excited to welcome Darlene Lancer to the podcast. Darlene was such a huge part of the beginning of my healing journey, and having to spend time with her in this beautiful healing container is a major thing for me. And Darlene brings a wide range of professional and life experience to her practice as a licensed marriage and family therapist, and also a relationship and codependency expert. She wrote Codependency for Dummies, which I read and gave a 5-star review to, and Conquering Shame and Codependency, 8 Steps to Freeing the True You. And over the course of 30 years, she's helped men and women recover from codependency and trauma. And here's my interview with Darlene Lancer. All right, Darlene, welcome to the podcast. I am so honored to have you here. I don't know if you remember, but you have been in my life, whether you know it or not, for a really long time. And I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing about codependency. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be invited and share with your audience. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I do have a question about how did you get, you've been in the codependency realm for so long. How did you end up there?
Well, I've been on the codependence for,
Oh, okay.
for a long time. And then I became a therapist over 30 years ago. And I was blogging and writing also because I enjoy writing. And I had been in Al-Anon for many years because I was married to an alcoholic. And Wiley Publications found one of my blogs on codependency and asked me to write Codependency for Dummies.
Wow.
And I was actually had to compete with other writers and I guess therapists. And when I started doing an outline for it, I realized that, I was like, this is what I'd been doing with clients anyway, helping them psychologically, you'd call it individuate. Is the term, but helping them overcome codependency for a few decades. And I knew this inside out personally and professionally and clinically. And so they say, go ahead and write the book. And then after that, um, Hazelden Foundation had read it and thought it was good and asked me to write one on conquering shame and codependency. So I got even deeper into the subject with my research. And once I started applying the principles I had learned about healing shame, my clients were recovering much faster. And that was something that, at least when I was in 12-step programs years ago, it wasn't talked about. And what I find is things are speeding up. And that people that have recovered now are passing on what they've learned, as I am. And so that people are healing faster. In fact, when I was in meetings, people didn't talk about domestic violence. They didn't talk about trauma. They didn't mention the word intimacy or codependency. People are aware and they pass on that knowledge and people can heal faster. And because of course, the internet, all this information is ubiquitous.
Right.
Because before people are one of the signs of a dysfunctional family and relationship is that it's a closed system. And if you're with an abuser, you think you're the only one. And you may even be controlled so that, that your partner doesn't want you talking to others or doesn't want you going to therapy. So that's part of the problem. The same with because of the shame with alcoholism.
Right.
So there's much more. What you're doing is a benefit to others, and so people can learn and change.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely feel that. I feel, you're an OG, original gangster. Like when did when did you write your first book? When did they pick up your blog?
I started writing it in 2011.
Yeah.
I don't know, my blog may have been a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
But I had been doing therapy since, I don't know, 1987.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. I'm interested to talk a little bit too about maybe how the definition has changed, because that's something that I personally,
Mhm.
um, I kind of had to define it for myself, and that's what I've been talking about too.
Mhm.
But yeah, I definitely feel like the more that you heal, the more that you can pass on what you learned, and I feel like it
Mhm.
does accelerate the
It
teachings.
does. Mhm.
I'm interested to hear. I bet, I don't know, we haven't really discussed this, but I'm guessing that you have seen the definition of codependency change throughout the years.
Well,
And
I did a lot of research about the definitions in writing my book too.
yeah, yeah, and your personal experience, I'm sure, as
Right.
well.
Mhm.
Can you give the listeners, a little bit of a timeline? I think that would be great, just to hear
Oh,
kind of how we arrived. I don't know how you want to work from back to front or front to back, but I think they would really enjoy kind of hearing the evolution of
okay.
codependency,
Well, I go into this in Codependency for Dummies,
which I've read,
and
by the way, which is amazing.
okay, in 1989, like 22 leaders came together in the field, and they came up with a definition that codependency is. I'm reading it from my book. Codependency is a pattern of painful dependence upon compulsive behaviors and approval of others to find safety, self-worth, and identity. Recovery is possible.
Mm.
But that wasn't the end of attempts to define it. It's not in the clinical um, diagnostic list of the mental health disorders. So there's many definitions, and different researchers come up with different ones. Originally, Melody Beatty was one of the first writers on the subject. I remember reading her book, I think in the 70s, and she defines it as letting another person's behavior affect you and obsess with controlling the other person's behavior.
Mm.
And then there were mental health. It came out of research with alcoholics and their spouses. And first the term was co-alcoholic. And then family therapists found that, well, after the partner got sober, that the codependence behavior continued and that actually it predated the marriage and that it
Mm.
stemmed from having a dysfunctional childhood family. There was illness in the family. There may have been mental health issues. So there were other reasons that led to the codependency that predated the marriage to the alcoholic. So then the term started spreading to other relationships beyond alcoholic marriages. And some researchers thought, like someone named Robert Subby, a family therapist, said that it results from prolonged exposure to oppressive rules.
Mm.
They also found that if you have a controlling mother, that could lead to like an obsessive compulsive controlling mother, that can lead to codependency in the children. So they do see that it's transgenerational. So you may have an addict grandparent and your parents are not, but the behavior gets transferred down.
Mhm.
And uh, I came to the conclusion that it has nothing to do really with whether you're in a relationship, because it has to do with your relationship with yourself.
Mm. Yeah.
And yeah, and so that's one of the myths, that if you're not in a relationship, you're not codependent. Also, I haven't seen other people write about this, but if you're in a relationship and you think you're codependent or you think your partner is, you both likely are,
Mhm.
unless you're just dating for a couple months or something. But if you're for any length of time, uh, it's a dynamic that both of you share. We're really attracted to someone who's of a similar emotional development, even though the behavior may be different.
Right.
So in my opinion, narcissists are codependent too. They're very dependent. Their defense mechanisms are different. So whereas they may demand their needs be met, uh, stereotypical codependent will deny their needs.
Correct.
But most of the symptoms are the same. And I've written articles about narcissists or codependent too. So I came up with the idea that codependents have this lost self. They're alienated from their authentic self, their real self, because they had to accommodate their parent. And if a parent doesn't have enough self and self-esteem, their needs will come first, or they will not see you as a separate self. They won't encourage independence, or they'll be the opposite. They won't give you any guidance. They'll just neglect you.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get to develop a self. If you have a narcissistic or an addict parent, then you have to accommodate them. You don't feel safe to express yourself, to be yourself, to be loved for who you authentically are.
Mm-hmm.
Your needs get shamed. You don't get emotional needs met in that family, even though you might get all your material needs met. So that's how it gets transferred from generation to another. My definition is more symptom oriented. It's a person who can't function from their innate self, and their thinking and their behavior revolves around someone else or a substance or process. So I include addicts in this too. They're addicted to the substance or the process, like gambling or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the codependent is addicted to them. You're not going to get your intimacy needs met with an addict, because
Right.
the object of your addiction comes first. And that's, if you're a codependent, you're going to put the other person first rather than yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love, I don't know how much I can express how, how much that your work kind of means to me, but I will keep saying it forever. But I think, oh man, so much good stuff about what you said, because I definitely felt that. And I don't even know if it was something that I came across in your work, but I kind of came to the conclusion that I was completely disconnected from myself for years. Like I didn't know how to make decisions. I didn't know what my emotions were. I didn't know who was good for me and who was bad for me. I just kind of took whatever like attention was offered me, it was just kind of all these developmental things that I never really experienced. And I also really connected with the part with you when you said about the behaviors and the processes surrounding codependency, because as I grew into my healing, I realized that this like was pervasive in my life. Like it had to do with relationships for sure, with people, but it also had relationships to do where other things to do with other relationships, like money, like my weight, the way I look, like the behaviors that I would do to kind of I call it fill my love tank, because seeking validation. It just brings so much light to that. So I really appreciate that.
Well, underneath codependency and shame are a feeling of emptiness, and that's from that disconnection.
Right.
And well, I've written a lot about emptiness. There's psychological, spiritual, existential emptiness, but psychological emptiness that affects codependence can lead to depression. And it's because of that disconnection. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is we look outside of ourselves to fill that up. But the sad thing is that the more an addict will look outside too for a drug or food or a process like gambling or work or something. And the problem is that the more you look outside yourself, the further you get from your true self. So it's a negative feedback loop. It's a self-perpetuating addiction because you feel more empty, and then you crave more, that relationship, that drug, that habit, and then you get further and further away from who you are. The gap gets wider. And so there's no way to get it outside. You have to fill it from go back inside. And that's hard if you didn't get that kind of presence and nurturing and attention from a parent, because you don't have those skills. That's one of the steps of healing, is learning how to nurture ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So beautiful. Do you and this is a question we didn't discuss, so I'm just wondering, like, why is codependency for me is it feels so like underground. It feels so like sneaky, right? Because all of, we're talking about like a lot of things, like it's big, right? Addictions, behaviors, not feeling your true inner divine self. These are big concepts, but codependency kind of runs the vein through a lot of this. I don't really know if I have a question, but I'm just like, it amazes me sometimes that, like, it's just not, I don't know. I think it's, we're talking about it more obviously these days. And like you said, it just, we're there's the internet, there's all this great information out there. But I also think that, you know, treating the symptoms like addiction or like, eating disorders or fill in the blank, name it. Why is there not more focus on something like codependency or, like you mentioned, it's not in the DSM. Is it just too hard or what? I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, it's so widespread
Right.
that everybody would end up like, a mental illness, and the insurance wouldn't want to cover that.
Okay. So there's the system. Okay.
There's that.
Yes.
Okay. Furthermore, the idea of it is based on Western social mores or philosophy, because in collectivist cultures, like in the Middle East and Asia and Latin America, the family is more important than the individual. So in the West, it's, the individual is more important, than the family in some respects. This is difficult for people that have immigrated and they see me and they have a different value system than their family, and they have a lot of conflicts. But anyway, so you might say from an American point of view, well, it's a problem worldwide. But if you're living, in the Middle East or Latin America, they would say, well, the Westerners, they're just too self-centered. They're too selfish. And so it's a different point of view. So that may be another reason why you might not consider it we would think it's a universal problem. But from another perspective, it's not a universal problem. We're the ones with the problem. They say that's why, in America, there's so much, depression and suicide and emptiness, and some of that's true because of disconnection from the family, but not because of healing from codependency.
Right. That makes a lot of
sense. That's another thing that some people think, that healing codependency is leading to more divorces and more loneliness, and that we discount the need for relationship. I actually go into this argument in my book and the pros and cons. I think there's a misconception if you haven't been in a codependent relationship, if you're not codependent or don't know what it's really like, aren't aware, you're thinking about the benefits of attachment and relationship. And now there's a lot of emphasis on attachment theory, but the problem is that codependents have a dysfunctional attachment. I have a blog called, my website, like How to Change Your Attachment Style. Basically, the answer is recover from codependency.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because the attachment in codependent relationships causes pain. To reap the rewards of a healthy relationship, which could be supportive, it could be really a home base and help you to be more independent and confident and energized. But if you're in a codependent relationship, you're going to feel drained. You're going to feel that your needs aren't getting met, You're going to be obsessed with the other person. You're just going to be unhappy most of the time. You might be ridden with fear and guilt, walking on eggshells,
Right.
afraid to say what you feel, ask for your needs. So it's not a healthy relation. It's not a healthy attachment.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it is so pervasive. It's so interesting. I feel like just random, but it's just so interesting how, all these different concepts are really just different words. It's like I said, I just feel like codependency was so sneaky on me at least, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way.
Yes, I say that on my website that it's like sneaky and subtle and powerful though.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you don't realize they're in a slip. You're backsliding until after the fact.
Yeah.
Recovery is not a straight line.
Oh
And
gosh, yes.
you might, feel like, well, I detached, I'm not codependent with that person anymore. And then you find out, well, you're codependent with your work or your child or
Right.
something
Yeah.
else.
The gym, it's crazy.
Mhm.
So I know we definitely want to get into your steps for healing and how to get started. I know you have some online materials that we will get out to the listeners at some point, but it
Mhm.
can be do you mind walking us kind of through where to get started or some steps towards healing for those listeners out there?
Okay, well, like you said, it encompasses so much. It's like a fish doesn't know it's in water because we don't see the air that we breathe. Um, and the first obstacle to healing is denial. I have a whole chapter on denial. And denial is considered the hallmark of addiction. And that's true for codependence too. So many people write me or ask me, like, how can I help my codependent friend or my codependent wife or something? They don't realize that they're codependent too. And so there's not just denial of codependency. Sometimes people, and myself included for a long time, aren't aware that they're in an abusive relationship.
Right.
They're not aware that their needs aren't getting met. They don't even know what their needs are,
Yeah.
other than like food and water and sleep,
Yeah.
sex or something like that. So emotional needs, as I mentioned, usually don't get met in healthy ways in a dysfunctional family. Denial of feelings. Many codependents aren't aware of their feelings
Mm,
or they can't name them, or they're just intellectual, but they don't actually feel them in their body,
right.
kind of disconnected.
Yeah, I definitely had to learn.
Below here.
Yeah, I had to learn through a lot of support how to do that for sure. Yeah.
So, and part of the denial makes it hard to start recovery because if the focus is on someone else, a lot of codependents are in a relationship with someone who's troubled.
Right.
I was myself.
Yeah.
And so you want to help that other person. I think I was in Al Anon for 3 years before I realized, well, the program, I'm going to have to start working this program for me,
Mm,
not, to help someone else or not to save my marriage, that I needed help myself. Because when I first went to meetings, it was to help the alcoholic. I thought, well, I'm not the one with the problem. So there was a lot of denial around that. And I didn't understand a lot of the terminology. And speaking about not being connected to yourself, when I finally decided to get a sponsor, maybe that was after 6 months or something, I would call my sponsor and I would report on how the alcoholic was doing.
mm-hmm.
And she was very patient. She'd say, that's fine, Darlene. I'll talk to you tomorrow. So she was very patient with me. And if you asked me how I was or how I was doing, I really would just say, fine, I don't know. And so getting in touch with your feelings, learning to name them
Mm-hmm.
is important. So you can just go through the day and say, ask yourself, what am I feeling? And see, in my book, I have a list of about 200 feelings, and you could Google a list of feelings too, and see if you can name it. And you may not be able to right away. And research has shown if you call yourself by name, it can be very helpful. So if you say, for instance, oh, Darlene, you're sad, or Darlene, you're angry,
Mm-hmm.
or you feel guilty, and you name it and you call yourself by name, that can be very helpful. It's a form of mirroring that you may not have received as a child.
Right. Kind of a
Journaling,
reparenting.
yeah, journaling is helpful for all of that so just throughout the day, you just ask yourself, what am I feeling? And I would add, and it's okay,
Mm,
because to a large extent, our feelings have been shamed. It's very close to who we are.
mm-hmm.
So don't, who do you think you are? Or you're too big for your britches. Or I've had clients that told me that because of religion, the idea of pride was considered, and self-confidence was considered conceit.
Mm-hmm.
It's sinful. Um, so uh, letting it, or anger was punished.
Right.
So you might not know that you're angry. You might just listen to the tapes in your head, or a lot of resentment and negative feelings about somebody. So just let yourself say, oh, I guess I'm angry, and it's okay.
I love that. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. So those are some things. And the other thing is, because shame is so integral to all of the codependent behavior, most of it are like defenses to feeling shame. Uh, Beware of your negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Write it down. I have a little YouTube where I say you could wear a rubber band and snap it whenever you hear yourself call yourself a name or shit on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You should have done that. You shouldn't have done that. So finding fault with yourself. And then we find fault with other people because we're never satisfied with ourselves. Maybe you had a critical parent, or maybe you just realized that you better be very careful in what you say and what you do, so you won't be rejected or punished or shamed or ignored by your parent. So you develop these voices in your head, this super ego, to try to protect you,
Mm-hmm.
because your survival depended on that relationship as a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a big aha moment for me. Oh, it's been like 5 years now, but I was on the critical parent realm. But there was a big aha moment for me when the very same day my dad said something to me that was critical of me, and my boyfriend at the time, my like major toxic relationship at the time, said the exact verbatim
Mm.
same thing. And I was like, no, this is something's wrong here. And that was actually kind of at the beginning of my healing journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, it's like if we have a lot of shame and low self-esteem, which stems from shame,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we're not going to be able to receive compliments. We're not going to be able to accept attention,
Right.
and feel uncomfortable receiving gifts or anything. I just recently wrote a blog on why it's hard to receive. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing to leave abusive relationships, but then, if you want love in your life, you have to be able to receive the good too. Sometimes that's the hard part, because it's how you treat yourself again. So if you have a template that says you're not enough, or whatever, you could fill it in: pretty enough, smart enough, successful enough, you're going to meet somebody who's going to confirm that.
Yes.
And if somebody doesn't, you won't trust them. You'll think they have poor taste. You'll make excuses. You'll think, what do they want? Or they really don't know me. You'll have all kinds of. I've even have couples where, let's say, a husband compliments his wife, and she actually hears a criticism. I asked him to repeat it like 2 more times, and she did not hear the compliment.
Oh.
So we filter out, we have these negative filters, so that reality confirms our, the outer reality confirms
Mm-hmm.
our inner reality.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to heal from the inside out, begin within.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'm on that kick lately too. I've been writing about with all my posts right now is that boundaries come from the inside and go out. Obviously, self-love comes from the inside and goes out. Your energy inside out. It's a big paradigm shift.
Right. So people will say like, okay, how do I set boundaries, or what should my boundaries be in this situation? I said, well, that's for you to decide. And setting boundaries to me is like graduate work, because first you have to know what you feel. We talked about denial of feelings and
Yep.
and what you need.
Yep.
And my boundaries might be different than your boundaries. What I'm comfortable with or what you're comfortable with. It's like not right or wrong. So you have to be able to identify that. And the next step is you have to be able to honor that. Like what you're feeling is okay and what you need is okay. Because people are always saying, well, is this because of my dysfunctional childhood that I want that or need that? And I say, well, it doesn't matter. That's what you want right now. So let it be okay. Am I asking too much? No, that's what you need.
Right. Yep.
So, and then having the courage and the words and learning to be assertive, to be able to communicate it in a way that you'll be heard. And then after that, you might have to have consequences because the other person might not follow through. So boundaries are not to change someone else's behavior. They're actually to protect yourself.
Yep.
So that's a concept too, you have to understand.
Yeah.
And often the person's behavior will change, but if they don't, then you have to take steps to honor yourself and protect yourself.
I agree. I love that. So good.
And I think the whole point of the 12 steps programs is self-love. So years ago, people would say to me, well, you're just going to have to learn to love yourself. And I just hated hearing that because I didn't know what in the world that meant.
Yeah.
And it's more than getting massages or bubble baths.
Thank you. Yeah. My book,
it's a lot harder than that.
Yeah. The book that I'm working on is Self-Love Is. It's 27 Secrets to Start Loving Yourself Today. Because of that, it's because like doing your nails is awesome, but how good does it make you feel? And is it really an action that brings, is a perfect example of love in your heart?
That's right. And, it could be that you were raised with the idea that appearance is so important. I would just say that many of us, never experienced what it means to really feel accepted for who we are.
Yeah.
And the contentment that comes from that. And so our task is to learn to accept ourselves, forgive ourselves, and really love ourselves for who we are, and not how we perform or how we look. We take our focus off of the other person or the substance, whatever we're addicted to, and really focus on ourselves. I mean, that's really the first step, because you can't recover if you're trying to change somebody else.
Right.
That's part of the problem.
Yeah, that's a never-ending battle.
So the first step of the 12 steps is like, I'm powerless over people, places, and things, right? Or I'm powerless over alcohol if you're an addict. So knowing that you really are not going to be able to change somebody else, and really just not just intellectually, but really in your heart. And so what are you going to do to change? Because I have clients that say, he still hasn't changed. I've told him, I've threatened, or her. And I say, well, but I hear you haven't gone to meetings. You're not doing this work. You're not, what about the exercises we talked about? What are you doing to change? So it's pretty hard to change, period. So it's hard enough for us to change ourselves, let alone someone else. And then it's gaining autonomy, actualizing who we are. So we have to get to know ourselves, as I said. And that starts with detaching, letting go of how somebody else is. And again, focusing on ourselves. It doesn't mean detaching doesn't mean that you're cold or you leave the relationship. It means that you are no longer reacting. So your buttons aren't getting pushed, that you're staying connected to yourself. You're staying in your own lane as someone says.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to get in to convince somebody. You know, if someone criticizes you and you start defending yourself and explaining yourself, what the subtext of that is, you're telling the other person they have a power to judge you. They have the right to approve of you. So, you know, a boundary would be, well, that's your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And walk away. You don't have to
Yeah.
convince anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned denial. It's hard to know when you're in denial because the whole point of denial is that you don't know, right? So,
I get a lot of I get a lot of messages as well from people that denial to me, I don't know if it's the same as you, but the word that comes up in my head also is victim, that are very in like the victim mode of I'm really, like it is denial, right? That deep denial of like, why is this person being this way? Or how do I change this person? Or how do I make this person see this and this and this? Um, yeah, I see that a lot too.
well, I remember one time many years ago, my sponsor said, I guess she was frustrated with me, and she said something like, I sounded like a victim. And I said, you know, I don't want to feel this way. I wish I didn't feel this way, in other
Right.
words. And she apologized, but it's when we feel like we have no power.
Yeah, that's it.
We have no, we have no authority. You know, the word authority, autonomy and authority come from author. You know, you become the author of your life, that you decide what behavior you'll accept. You decide what you want and need and who you will let talk to you a certain way, who you will be friends with, that we get to make those choices. So if you feel like a victim, and there's a difference between, and I have a blog of 10 steps how to not be a victim, something like that. So if you're, and denial can feed into that, because if you're having expectations, let's say you have an expectation that a narcissist won't be critical of you or is going to empathize with you, and that you keep feeling victimized by that, then you're not accepting reality. You're in denial of who this person is.
Right. Yeah.
Or that the alcoholic isn't going to drink. So you have to, there's like 4 A's, I think, of recovery, and one is abstinence. That might be detaching when you're talking about addiction to a person. And then awareness. So learn all you can about codependency and recovery. Listen to Lily's podcast and read my books. And then acceptance. And that could take years. So you may know the information, but accepting that that's the truth and reality, that's going to be hard, because we don't want that. You know, we don't want to accept that our partner is cheating on us. We rather look the other way.
Right.
Might not want to accept that our child is an addict. And so we brush it off, or and we don't know that we're doing it because we're in denial. So in my book, the Dummies book I have, and on my new website that's coming out, a list of some questions you can ask yourself to see if you're in denial. So if you're thinking things will get better at a certain time, like after we have a child, you know, when we have more money, if only, you have the if onlys, or you rationalize, make excuses for someone else. If you're hiding aspects of your relationship that you're embarrassed to tell other people, you know, those are some things, signs that you might be in denial. Or minimizing your own pain. Well, I remember when my late husband was being verbally abusive, I would tell myself, I know he doesn't mean that. I know he loves me. It still wasn't okay that he talked to me that way, but it took a while for me to figure that out.
Yeah, from going from not knowing to knowing, right? And then accepting.
And then the last thing is action. So once you accept reality for what it is, okay, then you can take action. As long as you want reality to be different, you're stuck in like, a hamster wheel.
Right.
So let's say you lost your legs in a terrible accident or a leg or something. And of course, there's trauma and there's pain about that, and there's suffering and there's anger. There's all these feelings you go through. So part of it coming out of denial is also going through grief.
Yes.
You know, when I finally got it that, oh, my husband might die of alcoholism. And I spent a couple of weeks like just grieving. He was very much alive, but I had to grieve that possibility
Yeah.
and let go and realize that was his journey.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with his sobriety. I could make it, I could enable it. So, you know, but I wasn't going to get him sober. In fact, overcoming codependency helped him to look at himself more because I was stepping out of the problem. It gave him back his problem.
Right. Yes. Oh, I love that.
So, so by example, like if somebody lost a leg, let's say, so they go through this period of grieving and then they say, okay, I guess this is my life. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to live my life now? And learn how to function that way. And maybe one day learn to do athletics with a prosthesis or something. But if you're still stuck in, you can't accept this reality, then you don't make effective change.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so coming out of denial and then building self-esteem. So how we talk to ourselves, you know, taking risks, learning to be assertive, learning to be assertive and say no to unacceptable behavior or just say no to requests that you don't want
Mm-hmm.
or things you don't want to do. That raises your self-esteem. And raising your self-esteem will help you to be more assertive. They go together. And poor dysfunctional communication and low self-esteem are symptoms. They're core symptoms of codependency, and they're learned from our childhood.
Right.
And you know what? They can be unlearned, and we can learn to have self-esteem. We can learn to be assertive, and we can start turning things around.
Yes.
But it's not easy. You know, it's simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
It takes courage. It takes support. And then, you know, another step is dealing with the original trauma and healing our wounds,
Mm-hmm.
talking to someone, looking at the source of the problem. So that could come at the beginning or it could come later. You start changing one thing and everything's just like you said, it's so interwoven.
Mm-hmm.
But the good thing news is you change one thing, it changes the whole puzzle too.
Yeah, again, I feel like the outlook changes, just like what you're saying, is that you're able just to look at one thing a certain way. It just translates. It's the beautiful flow, I think, of life. You know, like just translates into all other parts of life.
You shift one thing and the whole clockwork shifts.
Yeah.
So, and then the later stages is that then you're really expressing your passion, your true self. You're more connected to it. You're more autonomous, and then you can, you know, bring that into the world and follow your dreams and your passions, and you have more joy in your life.
So many beautiful people too sitting on that, which is why, why I'm here, why we, I feel like why, at least I can't speak for you, but why I do the work that I do. So I just want to close it off a little bit. It went longer than expected. I could probably talk to you for hours, of course.
It's a big subject.
Yes, it is. Anything else you want to add? Or I would just love for your take. And I've had I think I have maybe 200 episodes on the podcast. We connected on Instagram, and I talk a lot about, and sometimes I feel like I'm just preaching about the importance of support through all of that process that you're mentioning. Could you offer your take on if it is important, how important it is?
Absolutely, because you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. There's a saying in AA that it's like our stinking thinking got us where we are. Well, codependence, I mean, after talking to so many people, for instance, they would feel like being assertive sounds like being mean.
Right.
Or asking for your needs is selfish. putting yourself first is selfish, because we have these faulty beliefs that we're not aware of. So identifying your beliefs, you probably won't realize what they were unless somebody points it out to you. For instance, codependents usually believe that if they're loved, they're lovable. So that's a fundamental belief. So they go after love. They want to seek love because they don't realize it's because of the shame underneath. And so if someone loves them, then they're okay. So a lot of people feel shame that they're single. So if they're not in a relationship, something is shameful about that. Or one client thought that if they weren't pretty, that nobody would like them. Nobody would even help them. So appearance was so important. So there's so many faulty beliefs we have from our childhood that it's hard to identify them. And the other thing is that change requires action. And doing these, we can read it and that you can get so far, but in order to really shift and change our brain, it requires taking action. And that can be very scary. Just saying no to somebody, or asking if you don't think you're entitled to attention, or you don't believe your needs have value, asking for them can feel humiliating.
Right. Yeah.
If you're asking or your needs were shamed as a child, so it takes the encouragement of a sponsor, a therapist. And I think for years, I was actually teaching self-esteem at a time when I didn't realize that I had shame underneath. It came to me in a dream. And I actually started psychoanalysis around that time. So it takes somebody else reflecting that back to you, giving permission, practicing. Therapy is like a lab where you can practice with your therapist, new behavior. And so can't really do it yourself.
Yeah, I think that for me, the most impactful thing is what you're talking about with practice, and this is kind of, I guess, me on my pedestal, but the importance of someone in your life that's really dedicated not to do anything really besides just being there, right? Which you're not used to having anyway, right? Like you're saying, to practice, to bounce ideas off of, to realize what your feelings are, how you how they feel, where do you feel them in your body, all of that stuff. It's just so, for me, I'm going to be doing that forever because it feels so, it feels good eventually just to be able to be expressive.
Well, eventually it comes naturally.
Yeah.
So you don't have to think about it as much. I know when I was first started expressing, vulnerable feelings, I would start crying. But that after a while that didn't happen. Or I'd get anxious before setting a boundary with someone, or I'd feel guilty afterwards. But it's like building a muscle, and then it becomes easier. And then you find yourself, the neat part is like one day either your friends notice how different you are from in the beginning and you don't see it, or you somehow just say something spontaneously that you wouldn't have said a year before.
Yes.
So you can't judge yourself, in the last month, although people do make changes quickly when I see them, but look back like 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, and see how far you've come versus, where you want to go. So it's a life journey.
It is. So. It is. I love those beautiful surprises. I love surprising myself. It's the best feeling ever. It's been such a pleasure, Darlene.
Thank you. And delightful.
Yes, ma'am. Where can people find you? What do you like, your website? I know we talked on Instagram.
Right. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and whatiscodependency.com is my website. And my books are there. They're also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I have a YouTube channel. all my podcasts and videos. There's links on my media page on my website. My podcasts are also on Clipit, CLYP.IT, and all the links to everything are on my website.
Awesome. And I'll do my best to go back in the interview and try to find all the articles that you mentioned and try to link them up
Okay.
to make it easier. I'll do my best.
Okay.
But I think that would be a great reference for anyone that is interested in that. But I really, really appreciate you. I love
Well,
your
thank you.
work.
Thanks. Bye-bye.